Hello, everybody. Bob Fitzgerald, Brave Haven Media. Welcome to Close Encounters of the Ghost Kind. This is Bob Fitzgerald, your host for tonight's Close Encounters of the Ghost Kind. Tonight we have 4 tales of ghostly stories. Now, some of these stories may be a little scary, and some of them are not, because not all ghost stories are scary stories. But our first one tonight, the Black Aggie, fits into the first category. Scary. So without any further ado, here is the Black Aggie.
When Felix Agnes put up the life-size shrouded bronze statue of a grieving angel seated on a pedestal in the Agnes family plot, he had no idea what he had started. The statue was rather an eerie figure by day, frozen in a moment of grief and terrible pain. At night, the figure was almost unbelievably creepy, the shroud over its head obscuring the face until you were up close to it. There was a living air about the grieving angel, as if its arms could really reach out and grab you if you weren't careful. It didn't take long for the locals to spread rumors around the town and the countryside. They said that the statue, nicknamed the Black Aggie, was haunted by the spirit of a mistreated wife who lay beneath her feet. The statue's eyes would glow red at the stroke of midnight, and any living person who returned the statue's gaze would instantly be struck blind. If you sat on her lap at night, the statue would come to life and crush you to death in her dark embrace. If you spoke Black Aggie's name 3 times at midnight in front of a dark mirror, the evil angel would appear and pull you down to hell. They also said that the spirits of the dead would rise from their graves on dark nights to gather around the statue. People began visiting the cemetery just to see the statue, and it was then that a local fraternity decided to make the statue a part of their initiation rites. Black Aggie sitting is what it was called. Candidates for membership had to spend the night crouched beneath the statue with their heads facing away and their backs towards the grave. One night, 2 fraternity members accompanied a new hopeful to the cemetery, and they watched while he took his place underneath the creepy statue. The clouds had obscured the moon that night, and the whole area surrounding the dark statue was filled with a sense of anger and malice. It felt as if a storm were brewing in that part of the cemetery. And to their chagrin, the 2 fraternity members noticed that gray shadows seemed to be clustering around the body of the frightened fraternity candidate crouching in front of the statue. What had begun as a funny initiation rite suddenly took on an air of danger. One of the fraternity brothers stepped toward in alarm to call out to the initiate. As he did, the statue above the boy stirred ominously. The 2 fraternity brothers froze in shock as the shrouded head turned toward the new candidate. They saw the gleam of the glowing red eyes beneath the concealing hood, as the statue's arms reached out toward the cowering boy. With shouts of alarm, the fraternity brothers leapt forward to rescue the new initiate, but it was too late. The initiate gave one horrified yell, and then his body disappeared into the embrace of the dark angel. The fraternity brothers skidded to a halt as the statue thoughtfully rested its glowing eyes upon them. With gasps of terror, the boys fled from the cemetery before the statue could grab them too. Hearing the screams, a night watchman hurried to the Agnes plot. When he arrived, he discovered the body of a young man lying at the foot of the statue. The young man had apparently died of fright.
And that's the story of the Black Aggie. So if you're thinking of joining a fraternity, be careful about those initiation rites. Our next story takes place early in the 1800s, in the area of the Baltimore area. It's a soldier's story, a sad story to be true, especially if it is true. Here it is. The Brick House.
Massey was a soldier in my command, unfortunate enough to cross me, and he didn't live to regret it. There was something very satisfying in the moment when I thrust the tip of my sword into the soldier's heart during our duel. I watched him fall to the ground, and with satisfaction, I smiled with a job well done. The men under my command seemed depressed in the following weeks. They mentioned Massey in the duel quite frequently, but I ignored their conversations. One night, as I retreated to my chambers, I was soon joined by a delegation of men who were friends of Massey. I was surprised and delighted to learn that they had come to their senses and now saw the impertinent lieutenant for the cheat that he really was. We shared a round of drinks and laughed together, and I'm afraid I drank far too much that evening. The soldiers suggested that we explore the castle and the fort, down to the lower dungeons. That sounded like a fine idea to me. We set off in happy spirits, drinking and singing and laughing, our voices echoing through the narrow passages. Deeper and deeper we went. My head started spinning and my legs felt like rubber after all that alcohol that I had been drinking. I'm afraid I passed out from drunkenness. Cell in which I lay shackled. Very funny, I said again. No one answered me. They worked in silence, laying brick after brick until one row was done, then two. They were playing a nasty joke on me, of course. Then Massey's best friend paused in his work, and he looked directly into my eyes. At that moment, I realized that this joke was no joke at all. I began screaming. Scream after scream ripped from my throat as I struggled against my bonds. But the dungeon was too deep within the fort, and no one heard my screams. Then they were on the final row of bricks. I was reduced to bribery now, desperately using my wealth in an attempt to escape my fate. But no one listened to my bribes. I watched in heart-thudding horror as the last brick was put in place. As the last chink of light faded from my sight, I have been entombed alive in the deepest, darkest dungeon of the fort. I howled in panic, writhing against the iron manacles, binding my hands and my feet, and twisting my body. Eventually I fell back against the floor. My wrists and my ankles were wet with my own blood. My fingers were torn and throbbing from their intense scrapping against the hard floor. I found myself weeping angrily, though I have never shed a tear before in my lifetime. The agony of the thoughts sent me writhing again, in spite of the horrible pain racking my wrists, ankles, and hands. Daylight! I must see daylight again, just once more. Don't leave me here to die alone. Don't leave me. But I was alone, and the sheer brutal horror of it overwhelmed me. My eyes strained against the complete and utter darkness, and I wondered if they were even open. Dear God, I can't get out. I can't get out. I can't get out!
Poor soldier. He couldn't get out, couldn't get away. He should have known better. Should have treated his men better. If that story is true, his body is entombed in a fort on the East Coast somewhere in Baltimore. Think of it. Wow. Now, as we mentioned at the beginning of the show, not all ghost stories are scary. Our concluding two stories are of that nature. Our first one is of a ghost that seeks justice, as she was murdered by her husband. This is the story of the Greenbrier Ghost. I hope you enjoy it as much as we do. And now, the Greenbrier Ghost.
You've probably heard a ghost story or two in your time. And if they were like many, they were probably about someone who died with some unfinished business. Often these ghosts appear to be the living with a message that they needed to send or a truth that they demand come to light. After all, traditionally ghosts are the spirits of the deceased who, for some reason, can't cross over. Most people think of them as just stories, and today we would never take a story about a ghost as evidence in a murder trial. But that is exactly what happened in 1897 in Greenbrier County, West Virginia. And even creepier, it turned out to be true. At least that's how the legend of the Greenbrier Ghost goes. People have been claiming to have witnessed the paranormal throughout history, whether it be experienced classic signs of a haunting or a chance encounter with a playground ghost. But the Greenbrier Ghost is notable for being the only ghost to partake in a murder trial and turn out to be right. The story of the Greenbrier Ghost starts with this young woman, Elva Zona Hester Shue. She was born in Greenbrier County, West Virginia, sometime between 1873 and 1876. Not much is known about her early life, although it's believed she had a child out of wedlock in 1895. In 1896, Zona, as she was known, met a drifter named Edward Stribling Trout Shue. He was looking to start a new life as a blacksmith in the county, and Zona fell in love with him, even though her mother disapproved. Regardless of her mother's insistent dislike of Shue, Zona married him, and the two appeared to live a peacefully happy life as husband and wife for about a year. This photo may be their wedding photo, but no one is entirely certain. On January 23, 1897, Shue sent a hired boy into their house where the couple was living on an errand. The boy was shocked to find Zona sprawled out on the floor at the foot of the stairs, unresponsive. He ran home and told his mother, who called George W. Knapp, the local doctor and coroner. By the time Knapp arrived nearly an hour later, Shue had moved his wife's body upstairs, laid her out on the bed, and redressed her. He stayed while Knapp examined the body, cradling her head and becoming agitated when Knapp got close to Zona's head and neck. The death was ruled as everlasting faint. Time of her death. Either way, Zona's death was declared natural. Mary Jane Hester, Zona's mother, who had never liked Shue, observed that Shue's behavior during Zona's wake and burial was erratic, and that he seemed preoccupied with stabilizing Zona's head in the casket. His actions, combined with a strange looseness to Zona's head at the funeral, convinced Hester that her daughter had been murdered. Hester, pictured here, began to pray, and according to the legend, Zona's spirit appeared to her 4 weeks after the funeral. The ghost was said to appear as a bright light, bringing a chill over the room, and gradually taking form into Zona. According to Hester, Zona's ghost said that Shue was a cruel man who abused her, and one night when she didn't cook him dinner, he attacked her and he broke her neck. To prove this, the ghost spun her head all the way around. The ghost continued to visit Hester for 4 nights, telling the same story over and over. Today, a ghost sighting might not seem like enough to go to the police with, but for Hester, it was plenty. She spent hours in the office of the local prosecutor's office, asking them to reopen her daughter's case. The prosecutor's belief in ghosts made him reopen the side. By that time, Knapp admitted he didn't do a full examination of the body, and other people were beginning to feel something wasn't right. Despite protestations from Shue, Zona's body was exhumed and re-examined. The cause of death? A broken neck, with bruises in the shape of fingers on her skin. Shue was arrested after this find. While he was in jail, it came to light that Zona had been his 3rd wife. His first wife divorced him, accusing him of cruelty. His second wife had died under mysterious circumstances. Shue also talked about wanting to marry 7 women and made a drawing that was believed to be made while he was in prison. It seems to show a man and a woman as well as someone in a coffin. Shue was found guilty of murder in July 1897. He was moved to a state penitentiary where he died in 1900, probably of pneumonia. And as for Zona's ghost, it was never seen again. What do you think happened here? Did Zona's mother subconsciously put 2 and 2 together? Or was there something else at work?
Our last ghost story is one that I found very, very interesting. It's one that we've probably all heard from time to time in one variation or another. It's a ghost story about a busload of children that get caught on some railroad tracks and the train smashes through the bus. Now this story, though tragic, is not a scary one. At least not for the living. As I did research for this and in preparing for this year's Close Encounters of the Ghost Kind, I did research on this story, and I came across the story about a train and school bus wreck. I'm going to read part of this. Most of the tales account of a school bus full of small children were killed somewhere in Texas. The story goes on to say how these ghosts actually help passers-by in times of need. Now, this story, in fact, comes from Utah. And it was a bus of high school students on their way to school in a wintry morning in 1938. My wife and I did a little research and not only found the wreck site, but a memorial that speaks of the deceased in the South Jordan Cemetery. We found the graves of 3 young women that perished that day. Now, many of the students' graves can be found in multiple cemeteries in the southwest part of the Salt Lake Valley. Rella Marie Beckstead, 15 years old. Helen Lloyd, 17 years old. And Lois Ann Johnson, 17 years old. All died December 1st, 1938. 3 young women that have, for the most part, been forgotten in time and history. You have to research to know their story, but their story is one that many have carried on in tales of ghosts and lore. Not scary ghosts, but kind, helping ghosts. You see, not all ghost stories are scary. Here's a brief glimpse into their tragic deaths. December 1st, 1938, dawned as a snowy, foggy, eerily cold and quiet day. While a school bus had headed through the dense winter storm towards Jordan High School, a loaded Denver and Rio Grande freight train rolled north towards Salt Lake City. At 8:43, near the railroad crossing at 102 South and 400 West, the driver stopped the bus. He opened the door to look beyond the thick fog, but he did not see or hear the 80-plus car Flying Ute train approaching at over 50 miles per hour. He sat back in his seat, pushed the gas pedal down. The bus's rubber tires strained against the gentle grade and pulled slowly towards the tracks. The engineer and the train crew could barely make out the bus ahead of them. The crew frantically applied the brakes, but the collision was inevitable. The wreckage of the mangled bus left 23 students and the driver dead. 15 students survived the accident, and most of them faced a lifetime of serious physical injuries and emotional scars. On November 30th, 1938, Wanda Shields had planned to leave Jordan High School and spend the night at a friend's home. Wanda is now a silver-haired and with delicate hands that tremble gently in a cool wind, said that she and her friend would have ridden the bus back to school the next morning. It was something the teenage girls had done many times before. But when Wanda's mother called, they gave up on the sleepover. Wanda's little sister got sick, and her mother needed her at home. That last-minute change of plans saved Wanda's life. The next morning, December 1st, the bus Wanda would have taken from her friends' homes rolled to a stop at the railroad crossing on 102nd South and 4th West in South Jordan during the first snowstorm of the year. The bus driver opened his doors to look for the train but saw nothing in the thick fog. The driver pulled onto the tracks, and at 8:34 p.m., at the same moment, an 80-plus car train emerged from the storm traveling more than 50 miles an hour. The engineers slammed on the brakes, but it was too late, and the train plowed into the bus. Wanda waited at the old Jordan High School for her friend to arrive. They never came. And I was inside because it was snowing. We went into the school and went to our first class. and the teacher was crying. Mrs. Hawkins was her name. Then the bell rang very loud 2 or 3 times. They wanted all students in the auditorium. And that's when we were told of the tragedy. The collision killed 23 students and the bus driver. Newspaper images of the accident shows mangled, twisted metal beyond recognition around the front of the freight train. Wanda knew everyone on that doomed bus. The following poem was written by Naomi Lewis, one of the students on the bus, at the age of 17. Oddly enough, this poem was penned the night before she died in the bus train wreck. It is entitled Earth's Angels. I like to think that the wind is angels in the trees, stately, noble angels that no one ever sees. When the world is peaceful and people are living right, they rustle the branches gently throughout the entire night. But when the world is wicked, then sorrow bursts from the trees, and it sounds like the wailing, woeful hum of hostile, atrocious bees. But in my imagining, it's angels sorrowing in the tree. At night, they call a council of all the angels on earth. Each angel chooses a mortal to guide to his preordained worth. So I like to think that wind is angels in the trees, stately, noble angels that no one ever sees. Wow, that is eerie just in and of itself. Thank you very much, Naomi. Wherever you are right now, thank you for those words. May God bless the families. Imagine the tragedy that they felt that December morning. My word. The one girl, Helen Lloyd, who was 17 years old, she was the very last one to die from that accident. She died 2 days later on December 3rd. She's buried in the South Jordan Cemetery. It was a privilege for my wife and I to be there. And now I am going to let you hear the story, one of the stories that represents this story. But now, as Paul Harvey used to say, you know the rest of the story. So here's the story of the Helping Hands. My wife, Jill, and I were driving home from a friend's party late one evening in early May. It was a beautiful night with a full moon. We were laughing and discussing the party when the engine started to cough and the emergency light went on. We had just reached the railroad crossing where Villamain Road becomes Shane Road. According to local legend, this was the place where a school bus full of children had stalled on the tracks. Everyone on board the bus had been killed by an oncoming freight train. The ghosts of the children were reported to haunt the intersection and were said to protect people from danger. Not wanting a repeat of the train crash, I hit the gas pedal, trying to get our car safely across the tracks before it broke down completely. But the dad-blamed car wouldn't cooperate. It stalled dead center on the railroad tracks. As if that were enough, the railroad signals started flashing, and a bright red light appeared a little ways down the tracks, bearing down fast on our car. I turned the key and hit the gas pedal, trying to get the car started. "Hurry up, Jim, the train's coming," my wife urged, as if I didn't hear the whistle blowing and warning. I broke out into a sweat and tried the engine again. Nothing. "We have to get out," I shouted to my wife, reaching for the door handle. "I can't," Jill shouted. She was struggling with her seatbelt. We'd been having trouble with it recently. She'd been stuck more than once, and I'd had to help her get it undone.
I threw myself across the stick shift and fought with the reluctant seat belt. My hands were shaking, and sweat poured down my body as I felt the rumble of the approaching train. It had seen us and was whistling sharply. I risked a quick glance over my shoulder. The engineer was trying to slow down, but he was too close to stop before he hit us. I redoubled my efforts. Suddenly, the car was given a sharp shove from behind. Jill and I both gasped, and I fell into her lap as the car started to roll forward, slowly at first, then gaining speed. The back end cleared the tracks just seconds before the train roared past. As the car rolled to a stop on the far side of the tracks, the engineer stuck his head out of the window of the engine and waved a fist at us, doubtless shouting something nasty for scaring him so badly. That was close, Jill gasped as I struggled upright. How did you get the car moving? I didn't, I said. Someone must have helped us. I jumped out of the door on the driver's side of the car and ran back to the tracks to thank our rescuer. In the bright moonlight, I searched the area looking for the person who had pushed our car out of the path of the train. There was no one there. I called out several times, but no one answered. After a few minutes' struggle with her seatbelt, Jill finally freed herself and joined me. Where is he? She asked. There's no one here, I replied, puzzled. Maybe he's just shy about being thanked, Jill said. She raised her voice. Thank you, whoever you are. The wind picked up a little, swirling around us, patting out our hair and our shoulders like the soft of a child's hand. I shivered and hugged my wife tightly to me. We had almost died tonight, and I was grateful to be alive. Yes, thank you, I repeated loudly to our mystery rescuer. As we turned back to our stalled vehicle, I pulled out my cell phone, ready to call for a tow truck. Beside me, Jill stopped suddenly, staring at the back of our car. Jim, look, she gasped. I stared at our vehicle. Scattered in several places across the back of our car were several glowing handprints. They were small handprints, the kind that adorn the walls of an elementary schools all over the country. I started shaking as I realized the truth. Our car had been pushed off the track by the ghosts of the school children killed at this location. The wind swept around us again, and I thought I heard an echo of a child's voice whispering, "You're welcome," as it patted our shoulders and arms. Then the wind died down, and the handprints faded from the back of the car. Jill and I clung together for a moment in terror and delight. Finally, I released her as she got into the car, while I called the local garage to come and give us a tow home.
And there you have it, Helping Hands. Not a scary ghost story, but a good ghost story. If you are the kind that believes in ghosts, hopefully you can believe in those kind of ghosts, the heavenly ghosts, that help people, look out for one another. Perhaps it's an ancestor of yours just looking out for your well-being. Perhaps it's the ghost of a child or a young one that was taken too early, that is here just to comfort and to give peace. As my wife and I left the cemetery that day, we had a feeling of peace within us. Now, no one can tell you what those students' thoughts were on that fateful day. No one remembers what they were wearing. No one can probably tell you what they had for breakfast that morning. But if you go to the South Jordan Cemetery in Utah, you can visit their graves, feel the peace, and if you're lucky enough, maybe they can help you. As my wife and I were leaving the cemetery, a gentle breeze picked up and rustled the leaves in the autumn trees. And for a moment, I felt as if they were there, saying, "Thank you for remembering, for coming." Walking to the car, I said in my mind, "Thank you, Naomi, Rella, Lois, and Helen, for allowing us to learn this bit of history and feel the comfort of the rustling branches." Well, that does it for this year's editions of Close Encounters of the Ghost Kind. On behalf of Brave Haven Media, we wish all of you a very, very happy Halloween. Be smart and be safe, and God bless. I know I'm a nerd.